Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avergan. And Happy New Year, everyone. We are going to get right back into part 2 of our Ask Us Anything episode. We recorded this in one part, but we're bringing it to you in 2 parts. So let's just dive right in with my next question to Kelly Carter Jackson of Wellesley and Nicole Hemmer of Vanderbilt. Here we go. Okay. Next question. Let's do this. This is a little another one about your sort of academic work. But is there anything that you loved or hated about a teacher that you had, either in, I guess, suppose high school or college, or graduate school, that you've kind of tucked away as something that you want to carry into now the fact that you're teaching? So something that someone did in a classroom that you either liked or didn't like.
Man. Something I didn't like. Oh gosh.
You know, I can buy you some time by giving you an answer I have for this one.
I will not say this person's name. But
yeah, no, go ahead.
I had a teacher in high school who was the worst. She, I think, so I always knew since a very young age, I've always been writing, always reading, always writing. That's just been my thing. And I was in her AP English class, and I would chronically get poor grades, like all the time, like C's, B's, which, you know, I've always been a strong student. So I was like, this is personal. So I remember I had my mom, and my mother's a professor, a retired professor. So I would have her read all of my work before I submitted it, so that I knew, like, this is a work. My mom's a professor. I know. And I remember I worked so hard on this paper, like busted my butt, turned it in. And I think she gave me like a B+. Like that's the best she could bring herself to do. And I was like, what? And then I hope she doesn't still remember this. I wrote her a scathing letter about how she was a horrible teacher, that she could not critique talent. Like she had no ability to critique talent. She had no idea what kind of a good writer I was and who I was going to be. And I was going to grow up and be famous and all of this stuff, which I would probably cringe thinking about now. But yeah, I sometimes I think I have a personality where people are like, oh, you can't do that. And I'm like, I'll show you. Yeah. And I feel like she was that teacher that was like, nope, not good enough. Nope, don't like it.
But was she trying to motivate you?
I doubt it. I doubt it. I think she had, I don't know what, I think she had a real gripe towards me. Yeah. I mean, like it was bad.
So so has that affected the way that you approach students? And what's the lesson
because
there?
Now, I mean, I approach students with like, you know, I'm rooting for you, you know, like you can do this. Like I will never, ever say like, you know, you should just settle for this little thing over here. Like I'm always like, this is the sky. Let's get to it together. But it was not like that with her. And I still, whenever I get a little mad, maybe I channel some of that teacher energy.
That's funny. That's actually related to, you know, I taught for a couple of years right out of college. And one of the things that a fellow teacher once told me that I've thought about just in general and applies in so many other places, but, you know, she was like, as a teacher, you just will instinctively, naturally gravitate towards pay attention to the A students, the star students, and pay attention to the failing students to try and, you know, rescue them. And she's like, no one ever pays attention to the B students. And she's like, you have to pay attention to the B students because those are the ones, I mean, I suppose you're a bit of an example here, but those are the ones who are like right on the cusp, or those are the ones who are just, you know, but like every student deserves attention. And like that student isn't trying to, I mean, I suppose some of them are like, okay, B's great. That's my groove. Like I'll just slide it under the radar. But it was just such a nice lesson from her of like every single person deserves attention. It's so easy to just sort of like take this group and be like, they're fine. And that's fine. And we'll just let them do their thing, and I'm going to focus on the top and the bottom. But of course, you know, those B students are often the ones who, like, with a little motivation and a little bit of encouragement, are going to flourish. And I was thinking about this last night, actually, and I was thinking how, like, because I'm working on this sports series now, and my mind's in sort of how, like, sports reflects a lot. And I was like, actually, sports is like actually wired to really focus on those students, because like if you're a coach or if you're like a GM or something, basically what makes you good is like, can you turn the people with promise into stars, right? Can you take people over that hump from B to A? And so like so much of like coaching is focused on that person who's right on the precipice. And it's like a nice thing that like has been optimized for in sports or whatever. But in other fields, I feel like often it's just like, oh yeah, that person's just like that. They're cool. They're right below the radar. That's fine. Like let them groove. Don't pay attention to them. Yeah.
It's hard work. It's the hardest. I mean, all of my family is either professors or teachers, and it's hard work trying to teach for the whole classroom.
Yeah.
It's hard work.
But I love that insight, Jody, like that professors could learn something from coaches about how to spot the sort of folks who have more to give and want to give more, and help guide them into that space. You know, for me, as I said earlier, I was a very late arrival to history. My undergraduate degree is in psychology. And I remember the start of the second semester of my senior year, I was taking a bunch of electives because I'd finished all my major requirements. And I walked into this U.S. history class, and the professor, who I will name, Ray Habersky, he came in with such energy and such enthusiasm and such a sense of, I'm going to blow your mind because this stuff is actually really interesting and really matters. And I immediately, after that first day lecture, ran down to the registrar's office. I was like, what else is he teaching? I got to take more of this guy's classes. And I think that really shaped the way that I saw teaching when I finally got my PhD in history and was entering the classroom. Was like, you can set the tone by how you enter the classroom and the kind of energy and excitement that you bring to the things that you're teaching. And some days, as Kelly was saying, teaching is really hard. And some days it's really hard to muster that. But if you can figure out what the questions and stories are that excite you as a teacher, you can pass that on to students who might not actually be that interested in the topic that you're talking about, but who are sparked by the energy that you bring to it.
That's been my most gratifying aspect of teaching, is when someone who comes in the classroom was like, I hate history. And then by the end of the class, even midway through the class, they're like, oh my gosh, this is so fascinating. Yeah. And I'm like, gotcha.
Another little notch on the mouth.
Yeah.
That story, Nikki, sparked a memory that I completely forgot about until just this moment, but it's sort of the inverse of that, which is like, obviously enthusiasm is really important. But I remember one of my favorite undergraduate professors, this guy, Sean McCann at Wesleyan, he was like, the first day of class, he was like, look, I just want to tell you, I'm never teaching Gatsby again. I'm sorry. Like, I've done it for 20 years in a row. I'm just sick of this book. I'm not, and he was like, it's really good. You should go read it on your own, but like, I just can't bring it anymore. And so it's like, I appreciated that. Even at the time, I appreciated it being like, no, I'm not going to phone it in. I'm going to do stuff that I'm enthusiastic about. Like, that's the important thing. It's sort of the flip side of that. But it was just so funny where he was like, I think it may have even still been on the syllabus because he'd like copied it from the year before. And he's just like, folks, Gatsby's not happening. I'm sorry. I just can't bring it anymore.
Jody, did you end up ever reading Gatsby?
Oh, yeah. And it's fantastic. Good. I mean, I read it in high school, and then, that was actually one of my favorite things about some of these classes, especially some of his, like rereading stuff in college. And then sometimes in grad school that I'd read in high school. And it's like, oh, yeah, there's so much more going on here. Gatsby's great, but I wouldn't want to be taught by someone who was burned out on it, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it is. That's true. It is. Does have great in the there's a good tip for you. Put your reviews in the title of your work.
You're used to hearing my voice on the world, bringing you interviews from around the globe.
And you hear me reporting environment and climate news. I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. We're now with you hosting The World Together. More global journalism with a fresh new sound.
Listen to The World on your local public radio station and wherever you find your podcasts.
Okay. Let's see. Let's cruise through a couple more here. How do you get writing done? Do you have any tricks to? I know this is like, I was about to say, like, do you have any tricks for being really efficient and productive at writing? And I think the answer is no. It's a ongoing struggle. But what is the status of your struggle?
Oh God, I'm going on almost a week writing retreat next week to finish my book, edits, and all of that stuff. I need big blocks of time. Mm-hmm. So if I'm writing a book, I need like a good solid 8 hours, and my most productive hours are between 10 and 2. Like that's just like the peak of my intellectual capacity. If I'm writing op-eds, I need about 3 hours. Mm-hmm. Now that if I'm in a constant groove where I've been writing them and I'm not like sort of out of practice and I have an idea that I'm hyper focused on, maybe an hour to write the first draft, a second hour to edit, the third hour to edit, and then it's like good to go. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. Writing for me just takes a lot of time. If it's going to be really good writing, I need to block out significant time. Mostly not to create it, but to edit it. Because I feel like I can create kind of quickly. But editing and fine-tuning just takes time. So
I was going to ask, is it like, when you say, let's say, as a 4-hour block, is it kind of like steady chipping away within that 4 hours? Or is it like you got to wind up, get your thoughts together, and then it's like blurt it all out and... Is there a hyper-productive hour within those 4 hours? I
write like a stream of conscious. So I just keep going and going and going. Because I know I'm going to come back and edit. Mm-hmm. Because if I stop in the middle to go deeper down a different rabbit hole, then I get stuck. So it's better for me to just like write and put it on the page, and then I can come back to it.
Okay. I definitely think of writing as both a practice and a job. It is something that cannot wait for inspiration. Sometimes you just have to sit down and you have to meet your deadlines. And so staying in practice is really important. I find that writing begets more writing. So the more that you're doing, the more that you can do, the less that you need to do that kind of gearing up and warming up. And the more you can just like sit down, start writing, get it done. I also find, though, that I am helped a lot by having breaks in time to just like, I do my best writing when I'm walking in a way that I need that kind of brain clearing space where I can do some thinking and start to feel the shape of a project or a chapter or an op-ed. And that really generates much better work. And I can also tell when I'm getting burnt out because I can't quite get myself to quiet down enough to think through those ideas, if that makes sense.
I feel like, I mean, just in my experience, but I feel like a lot of people, it's one of the things that you start to recognize is those moments of diminishing returns and those moments of burnout. And it's like, it's no point in just sitting there and slogging. You're just going to make yourself feel bad. You're going to make something probably that's not up to stuff, and so give yourself space. And then, as you were saying, Nikki, I mean, work your way backwards from that and say, okay, then how do you build in systems that give you that time to not reach that point of, burnout, diminishing return, burnout under a deadline, right? That's the worst, right? Ideally, you've kind of given yourself space. But I personally, in the writing that I do, which is mostly, for scripts for audio and stuff, or I often do a lot of editing. But it's like that idea of if I can take a crack at something and then ruminate and mull as I'm working out or walking around, and then come back the next day, that would be and do an hour of really concerted work after my brain has sort of marinated on it for a day. That's so much more productive than just slogging away at it for 4 straight hours, but it's tough and it's all about time.
that is the real challenge.
Yeah. Kelly, I know you mentioned that you're doing this little retreat thing, and I think you said you rented an Airbnb that has a lot of light. I mean, there's specific like, little things like, do you need light? Do you need sunlight?
I need light.
Music?
I need light. What? I cannot be in a basement. You know what I mean? Like or an attic or something that doesn't. I need lots of light. I need nature. I need either trees or water or something pretty. I need a good playlist. I need good music.
Can your music have lyrics in it?
Sometimes, yeah. I need something that I can't listen to hip hop because it's too wordy. Anything that's like too many words or someone speaking. Like I can't listen to a podcast while typing. Like I have to listen to instrumentals or like some sort of like slow intellectual music that will get me in a groove. And then if I've got coffee and snacks, like, I'm good to go. But a nice comfy chair, you know, and I'm not too cold and I'm not too hot and, you know, all that stuff, like it works.
I love this because I was just flashing back to so much of the writing that I've done, which is like hacking away at a piece on my iPhone or like stuck on a train or, you know, pulling my car over to the side of the road so I can like fit in a little bit of writing to meet a deadline while I'm traveling. And you can certainly do that, but it does help when you have a desk to sit at and maybe like a pad of paper so you can do a little long form handwriting in order to break through a block, a little free association before going back onto the computer. And I absolutely can only listen to ambient music. I can't listen to anything that I'm going to start singing along with because my brain immediately like picks up the lyrics and then I'm gone. But then like having caffeine, having just like a little bit of quiet to write is the ideal situation, even if it doesn't always present itself.
Yeah. Although I've definitely spent times when like all I've done is set the mood and never actually done any writing. It's like, oh wait, I just spent an hour like, you know, getting the right snack and making this perfect tea and like setting my computer up, and then it's like, oh, I only have 20 minutes left. You know, you feel productive because you've set such a great mood. You know, you've done some.
But really the tea was amazing, perfectly steeped.
Yeah. All right, one question that came in that you know I can talk about, but I'm curious to your thoughts too. But you know, what the question is, what's it like being part of Radiotopia? And I mean, that's a big question. I mean, you know, my main response to that is, I mean, it's wonderful. And, you know, as we say over and over, but I really think like sometimes it's hard to really get this across. But, you know, Radiotopia is a network of independent shows. And I mean, the founder of Radiotopia, Roman Mars, always talked about it as like an independent record label in a sense. And if you think about that, you know, I think it's really helpful because if you look at something like that, what you realize is there are some people who just like know what they're doing. They want to just do their thing and they want to be part of a network, and that's nice to be affiliated. But like really, it's just kind of like do your thing and that's fine. And then there's other shows that I think it's a little closer to more traditional kind of like we need some support. We need some institutional support, sometimes even a little editorial guidance. Though really most of the shows at Radiotopia really do operate on their own. And that's kind of why they came to a place like Radiotopia. It was like we get to call our own shots. No, we're not running stuff by anyone, but we're getting support. And, you know, frankly, like it feels good to just look around and be like, look at all these other shows that are like, we're part of, you know, and it feels good to be part of it. And we shout each other out on social and we do fundraising together. Hint, hint. You know, the one other thing I'll say, and I'm curious your thoughts, but, you know, the one other thing I'll say is like, we started the show right as the pandemic was starting. And, you know, to me, when I've been a fan of Radiotopia, so much of it has been related to kind of like going to these live shows where I've just seen like all these people together and I'm like, oh wow, all these shows are together. They're like doing this stuff on stage and they're just like physical, just like the physical togetherness of it feels like critical, and it just hasn't been part of our Radiotopia experience. But I'm very excited for next year for that to come back a little bit more. And like we've done a little bit of getting together with other shows, and even some of the producers here in New York get together from time to time, and we're going to have like it hasn't happened in a number of years, but next year there's going to be, you know, a big sort of like get together for all the Radiotopia shows. And I'm just like really excited for that part of it, because I think that's a huge part, is just sort of when you're physically in the same space with these other folks who inspire you. It's really great.
Yeah, I was excited about joining Radiotopia in part just from a little personal history, which is the very first podcast that I ever listened to was 99% Invisible, which is Roman Mars's podcast. And so for me, Radiotopia and podcasting were sort of intertwined from the very beginning. And so it felt very cool to be part of this network that had been such an important part of my just experience as a podcast listener. To be able to be a podcast creator with it was pretty awesome.
One of the things I've loved about Radiotopia so much is that I really feel like when we started Operdemics, that I didn't have a parent, I had a partner. Like when you think about being on the other side of show making and all that's involved, it's so wonderful to have people that can, give you awesome examples of what a great podcast is, but then also help to walk you through that process of what you can do to make your own show really great. And so I've always thought that's been just a wonderful network or community, I should say, of how podcasts have come together and really supported one another.
Yeah, and that's definitely one of the advantages of being a part of the network. It's, there's no, I think that's right. It's the partner versus parent is exactly right. I mean, there's a real sort of sense of like, oh, these other shows have found their own version of success, and so we can learn from that. But it's not like, oh, here's the model, and here's how you do it, and here's how it's dictated from on high. There's none of that at all, and that's kind of really wonderful if you have an idea and you feel like you know how to kind of head towards that. And I'll say, like, of the many ways you can describe Radiotopia, for me, the one that's come down to it is mostly kind of like, it's a place for creative people who feel like they have a very strong idea and they want the support to pursue it. And that I think is like really the through line for all of the shows, as they run the gamut across, topics and formats and so forth. Final question. This is like classic ask me anything question, but let's end on it. And it's, a couple people have asked kind of, what do you read? Like, what's your, I know we read a ton, but like, what is your sort of like regular reading diet? Like, let's say week by week or whatever. Anyone want to jump in on that? Mm-hmm.
I also have outsourced a lot of my reading time to listening time. So I listen to a lot of podcasts. I read the major newspapers in the way that we read those newspapers these days, less going to the homepage and more relying on my Twitter feed to curate the articles that I'm reading. Probably going to have to find a different way to consume that information in the nearest future. We'll see. But that has been my way of encountering the news. I follow a lot of conservative people and personalities and politicians, and often will go check out whatever's popping in that land. I also read a lot of just like light novels. I read a lot of what I think, I don't know if we've reclaimed this word, but what would be called chick lit. These kind of female-led, often based around romance or based around careers. Like I love that because it's both really fun to read. It is aligns with my values, and then it also doesn't require the kind of heavy lifting that nonfiction often requires. I usually have one or two nonfiction books going, one that's based on whatever research I'm doing, and one that's based on just something that I'm kind of interested in. I'm reading about journalists in the 1920s and 30s who were covering the rise of fascism right now, and then also books on Iran-Contra for my next book project. And then I have a couple of, I'm exploring Asian American women writers at the moment. So I'm reading a couple of just chick-lit-y type books in that realm right now.
I listen a lot. I probably listen more than I read. Like Audible was my thing for, it still is. I still listen to a lot of books more than I read them because I can consume while I'm driving, while I'm doing laundry or cooking or whatever, and that works well for me. But if I'm reading, I have to read in the morning because if I find that if I read at night, I fall asleep. So like most of the reading I do, whether it's the morning news or skimming through a book I need to cover or something like that, almost all of my best productive work is 10 to 2. Like that's when it happens.
Cool. I definitely listen a lot. And I'm always, and mostly for fiction. I mean, I'm always I feel like I'm trying to always have at least one piece of fiction that I'm listening to. And that's often when I'm working out or whatever, I'll turn to that. And then, yeah, I mean, I think I've turned to newsletters a lot in the same way that a lot of other folks have. And then I subscribe to, a bunch of magazines, the New Yorker and Oxford American and the Review of Books. It's funny. I also subscribe to the Times, the New York Times, like Friday, Saturday, Sunday physical newspaper. And I'm not like, nostalgic or whatever, or feel like, I have no problem reading on iPad, but this was a thing that has changed since I've been a parent. I had this realization that like, oh, if my daughter like looks over at me and I'm staring at my phone, she doesn't know that I might be reading like a really in-depth, reported piece in the New York Times or whatever on my phone. She's just like, oh, there's my dad. He's staring at his phone for an hour. And so I kind of had to be like, oh, I need more physical media in this household so that when she looks over, she's seeing me like actually reading, I'm because in my head I was like, oh, I'm modeling reading. And to her, she's just like, no, he's modeling looking at his phone or his iPad.
I also subscribe to the physical New York Times, but I do it because online I don't get the same kind of serendipity reading. Which is to say, like, I click on articles that seem really interesting to me, but when you have the paper that's kind of open there in front of you, you end up reading these articles you never would have clicked on otherwise. Totally. And I feel like I need a little bit of that to keep myself from being too narrowly focused.
Yeah. I was at a party last week and someone mentioned offhandedly that like a mutual friend of ours who's a journalist, is not, he's in his 30s, but he reads the paper front to back every single day. He just sits there and he reads the paper like he's, like it's 1982. It's just amazing.
He doesn't have kids, does he?
I was like, wow. But yeah. All right. Well, let's leave it there. That was really fun.
I love that.
I hope people got some, some answers, and I hope we got to spend some quality time together. And we will be back in the groove. Like I said, we're going to do a few reruns, airing some sort of episodes we really like as we plot and scheme for the next many months of new episodes.
2023.
But here we go. All right. So Happy New Year to you both. Happy New Year to all of you who are listening. I know it's the new year. Technically, the Radiotopia fundraiser is over, but if you want to sneak in a donation to Radiotopia, you can, of course, do that. But more importantly, be in touch if you have any thoughts about the new year, any suggestions for topics as we go into a new year and we sort of hit reset on the calendar and we cycle back around, and anything else at all, get in touch. You can email us thisdaypod@gmail.com, find a form on our website thisdaypod.com. We have a newsletter, etc. All right, Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you as always.
Thanks, Jody, and Happy New Year's, everyone.
And Kelly Carter Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure. Happy New Year.
Radiotopia. From P